Hi, everyone. I will go ahead and get us started. Thank you all for joining this Gutman Library and Harvard Education Press book talk. I'm Molly Cerrone. I'm an acquisitions editor at Harvard Education Press, and I'm delighted to introduce you this afternoon to Alexis Redding, the editor of the volume Mental Health in College: What Research Tells Us About Supporting Students. Alexis is a developmental psychologist and a leading expert on mental health in young adulthood. Her work focuses on how to best support young adults during college and in their transition to the workforce. She's a lecturer on education and faculty co-chair of higher education here at HGSE. She's also the inaugural faculty chair of the Mental Health in Higher Education Professional Development Program at HGSE, and she co-leads the Transition to Adulthood Lab. Alexis is the co-author with Nancy Hill of The End of Adolescence: The Lost Art of Delaying Adulthood from Harvard Education Press in 2021. And all of Alexis's scholarly work continues to have significant practical impact as well. Her research has been used to support the design of Harvard College's honor code and revise ethical guidelines on college admissions. She is a TEDx speaker and regularly keynotes on student mental health, and her work has been featured in popular outlets such as the New York Times, Fast Company, Teen Vogue, Inside Higher Ed, and other publications as well. So it's an honor to have her here today, as well as our other panelists. I will go ahead and turn it over to Alexis, Dustin, Adam, and Adrian to kick off their conversation.
Thank you so much, Molly. Molly was integral in bringing this book about. It has been a 2.5 year labor of love to get us to this point, to get mental health in college into the world with 20 contributors, and 4 of us are here today. Across this volume, we have student voices, we have medical doctors, clinicians, professors, researchers, student affairs practitioners, so many people who care deeply about supporting students as they are navigating the college years. And I am really proud of what we were able to do together and excited to be in conversation with 3 of those collaborators today. What we were trying to do in this book is to bring together a kaleidoscope of different perspectives on the student experience and student mental health. The idea being, what would happen if 20 people who are not attending the same conferences, who are not sitting in the same meetings, who are not reading the same journals, became part of one shared conversation across all of our silos to ask and answer the big question: what's going on for students, and how do we create a caring community where every student is able to thrive and have what they need? So before we dive into the content of the book, I want you to get to know the 3 fabulous folks who are part of our conversation today. I will ask each of them to just introduce themselves with a couple of sentences about who they are and where they are, maybe not literally at this precise moment, but where they are embedded, what is the work that they do. Then they'll pop back over to me, where I will share a little bit about some of the overarching thematic messages of the book and ask each of them to share a little bit about their contributions and the lessons that they have imparted to our readers. So Dustin, I'll start with you, then pop it over to Adam, and then Adrian.
Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're calling in. My name is Dustin. I'm usually based in New York. And for the past 2 years, I've been the Senior Associate Director of the NYU Stern Initiative on Purpose and Flourishing. Before that, I was working at the Stanford Life Design Lab as the Associate Director. Across my higher ed career, I've really focused on the questions: how can we prepare students for a long career, not just their first career out of undergrad, and really exploring questions around purpose and flourishing for our undergraduate and graduate student populations.
Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Milano. I am faculty at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Social Work. I also teach with the Mission Critical Team Institute and with the professional program in higher education run by the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I am additionally a disaster mental health specialist with the American Red Cross, and I do consulting work with Big Sky Bravery. Delighted to be here to talk to you today about my chapter on student veterans.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrian Gonzales. I'm the Vice President for Student Services at San Diego Miramar College. I've been in the community college system for about a little over 25 years, and throughout that time have worked primarily in the student services arena, and mental health on campus is one of the things that is under my authority. So glad to be here. Happy to share our information with you.
Fantastic. And I will just name that these three folks are either officially or unofficially part of different teaching teams that I have run here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, either as my teaching fellows and thought partners in designing those courses, both for our master's students who are on campus and those who are online, as well as then in our professional development program. And Adrian, I don't know if you know this, but I consider you an honorary member of all of these teaching teams because for the past couple of years, I have asked Adrian to come in and share his expertise with our students, and he always inspires every single group, always says yes to my repeated asks, and really contributes in such a powerful way to the conversations that we're having about supporting all students. And one of the things that we're doing in these conversations in my classrooms and in this book is trying to expand our narrative about what is college and who is a college student. College students are not just 18 to 22-year-olds who live in residence on a college campus the way they do here at Harvard College, where I am based. It is really important to recognize that only about 13% of college students fall into that category. The rest are students who are navigating, commuting to campus, learning remotely, being older learners. What the Trellis team out of Austin, Texas, who wrote one of the chapters in this book, call a modern learner, and our ability to update our narrative about who our students are is the first place where we can begin to push and expand our conversation about supporting all learners. What we've tried to do in this book beyond that is also broaden our conversation about what it means for students to struggle in college. And when we're talking about student mental health, that is more typically a conversation about students who have a diagnosable mental health condition who need the care and support of trained clinicians. And that is an important conversation for all of us to have and to make sure that all students have access to care when they need it. In our book, we both center that and then expand the conversation to think about the students who are having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, a bad year. Students who are experiencing the very typical ups and downs of the college years. And what we're trying to do in this conversation is recognize that the ability to support student mental health is not just happening in the counseling center, and it's not just for folks who have a diagnosable condition. This is for all students who are struggling with how hard it is to navigate a new learning environment, a new living environment for some, and to be in a moment of transition. Transition is hard, and transition is particularly hard when you are juggling competing responsibilities and competing goals and living in a moment that is incredibly complex. And so what we have really been aiming for in this book is an expanded conversation in both of those ways. And so I want you to get to know how that plays out in the book itself by hearing from some of our authors, starting with Dustin Liu. His part in conversation with Joe Catrino at Dartmouth College is in thinking about the arc of the student journey as a whole. And we're trying to push at the bounds of what that narrative of college means. That it doesn't just happen between the bounds of orientation and graduation, that it happens in the years leading up to college and what happens in the admissions process. We have a chapter on that that is co-authored by the CEO of the National Association of College Admissions Counseling about the stress of admissions. And then we have Dustin and Joe's chapter about what happens on the other side and transitioning into the workforce and the stress of getting a return on your investment. Are you going to get a job, particularly in our current moment? And how all of that emotional energy that is focused on what happens after college filters into the college experience. So Dustin, if you could tell us just a little bit about this powerful chapter about navigating the transition out of college.
Absolutely. Alexis, I just want to make sure that you can still hear me and see me. Thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Alexis. I think right now, all of the students that I've been working with, and when we look at the broader labor landscape, students are asking the question, what will I do after graduation? What will I do next? And the world is changing so often. I've often found that helping students really center on the question, who am I? What are my values? And I think most importantly, who do I want to become? Are questions that we want to support students in exploring. Traditionally, these questions have been housed in career centers and housed in career conversations or vocational conversations. And I think more and more, we've come to the realization that students are facing a multitude of different questions. What does it mean for us to actually recognize that the transitions that students are going through can't be a solo sport? We really need to think about a cross-campus strategy to really support students in asking questions like, why am I making this decision? Why am I choosing this class? Why am I choosing this major? And I think that discernment process of helping students actually develop the language around why they're making the decisions that they're making becomes a powerful tool in weathering the waves that we don't know what they will look like. In the chapter itself, I wanted to shed light on some of the exercises that we actually support students in experiencing. This is really drawn from the work at the Stanford Life Design Lab, which recognizes the power of design thinking and helping students navigate ambiguity and complexity. Recognizing that our students will have 2, 3, 4, if not 5, 6, 7 careers in their life, a lot of that will require them to return to this idea where we need to prepare students to navigate the complexities that come next. And I think a lot of this work really centers around how these exercises can not only be playful and invite them to create the skills that they need to navigate that ambiguity, but more importantly, we actually want to recognize that so much of this work needs to happen in community. I think if anything comes out of our chapter or anything that we want to make sure that we get across, it's the reality that so much of this work happens alone. And whenever we do this work with students, we oftentimes hear them say, oh, I'm realizing that I wasn't the only one that didn't have it all figured out. And if there's anything that we can do to create that reaffirmation that transitions are a part of life, they'll continue to experience them, and that when you have community that you can lean on, mentors that can be mirrors and guiding lights, drawing from Alexis's work, things feel a little bit more easeful and a little bit more spacious. Maybe just the last thing that I'll say is that oftentimes when we give advice to students, we're giving them one path. Take this class. This is a job that you might want. And something that I've learned from everyone on this call that you're seeing right now is the importance of offering students choice and building their sense of agency. When we're asking, when we're giving students advice, what does it mean for us to actually create options for them rather than limiting them and actually open that aperture a little bit more? Alexis, I want to make sure that captures the spirit of the chapter before I pass the baton.
It does indeed. And we will come back to expand on some of those themes, but that gives us a really clear sense about normalizing the experience and these traditional moments of transition that all students are going to navigate. So thank you for sharing that. I will frame for Adam's part as he comes in to share his chapter. One of the other things that we wanted to do in the book was to address an idea that we talk about a lot in my classes, which is called targeted universalism, which is designing programs, policies, practices in our institutions that are aimed at supporting students who are struggling, but benefit all students. And so by understanding the unique experiences of some groups of students, we can design programs, policies, and practices that help them, but benefit everyone. And what I asked Adam to do in coming to join us as part of the book was just talk about one of his real areas of expertise, which is student veterans, and to think about how do we frame a conversation around supporting student veterans and military affiliated students? How do we design programs, policies, and practices to help them? And how does that shift help everybody in our community? And so, Adam, if you could share a little bit about this powerful chapter about supporting student veterans.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I appreciate that introduction to the chapter and that framing. And I'll kind of arrive to the bottom line up front, or the bluff, to use a military term right away, which is that idea of when you have military veterans on your campus, no matter why they served, there's a heart of service there to their community. And I think when we talk about that strength-based perspective of how does supporting a group actually support the campus, if we hone in on this idea of serving your new community or your new campus, we actually really support something that's inherent within our students here. And I approach this topic in this perspective as Alexis introduced, that mental health happens all across campus. And I approach it from this idea that mental health actually happens all the time. When we talk about mental health, we often only talk about it when we're having poor mental health. But mental health exists whether we're having moments of average or great. It exists in the clinic. It exists in the community. Prevention exists in the community. And when I was thinking about our talk today, specifically about our student veterans, what was really on the forefront of my mind as I think about when mental health exists all around us was the weight of that topic right now in the world and the United States, and how complicated the military's relationship is with higher education right now, as it has been for so many moments in our history. And I think that's important not only for me to think about my thoughts today on, but the idea that our student veterans, they really feel that, both in the weight of the now, but also the weight of that throughout history. And when I first started writing this chapter, I was actually still in the military, and I was also back in grad school. So it was one of those unique, challenging moments in life where you're studying, researching, and writing on a topic that you're definitively a part of and actively experiencing. And at the time I was writing the chapter, the narrative in my own clinical practice as a social worker was active duty military kind of reeling from the moral injury of the pullout of Afghanistan. Yet so much of the data that I was looking at that was available at the time was based when we were actively in Afghanistan. So there was this active translation in writing of where the data was versus where the student veterans are now. And then, of course, between writing that chapter and the book coming out, we're in a different moment for our student veterans and military affiliated students. And I think that's one of the key factors of this chapter is that when we talk about mental health, we're encountering these military affiliated students at these different moments of the of time of the chrono system, right? For instance, a student veteran, if they're in school and they're a student while they're in the reserves of the National Guard, they may be in class or in treatment or in clinical treatment while thinking about, am I being deployed? What is the US doing domestically or internationally? When we consider the mental health needs of student veterans, we also want to consider that these are students who may be using GI Bill benefits to support their family, to support their loved ones. And so that when we talk about the data for student veterans nationally, we want to figure out what are the mechanisms by which this data is being approached. If it's just by GI Bill numbers, that might be painting a potentially inaccurate or misinformed picture of not only who our student veterans are, but also their success rates in school. And if we look at this national data that creates this narrative of who these individuals are, what I think it does is I think it oversimplifies. And so if there's kind of one key point to my chapter, it's we really need to know who those student veterans are on each one of our campuses before we can talk about how we do interventions either clinically or in the community. There's a phrase from a book called War and Homecoming by Travis Martin. And while the source of this quote is unattributable, I first read it in that book. And it's if you know one veteran, you know one veteran. There's ideas that there's this incredible diversity of experience, not just the diversity of the individual with their multidimensional identities, but also a diversity of military experience. And so when we hear a kind of stigmas or trends, either in mental health or in belonging or student success, we really want to boil that down to who is the person in front of me on my campus at this moment. I could go on and on about the different things I learned through the literature and explored in the chapter, but one of the things I'll just note before I pass it back to Alexis here is that when we started looking at student veterans fit instead of what made student veterans feel like they did not belong, we actually watched student veteran success increase. And I saw this in study after study after study. But there's a nuance there. And one of my favorite studies by the authors Sullivan and Yoon, which I think came out in about 2020 or 2021, they identified student veterans' strengths. And they were identifying things like their ability to communicate across difference. But then if you looked at some other studies that didn't focus on strength, you saw some of the same things parallel. For example, communication was one of them. So in one study, a strength is I have the ability to communicate across difference. In another study, student veterans were identifying one of the things that might make me feel a little bit different or make me feel a little bit lonely or like I don't belong is the way in which I communicate with others. So, what do I hear there? Is an opportunity for growth, or to quote William Perry, an opportunity for courage and action, which is to say, let's identify your strengths and let's talk about how we can use these to increase something that's so important to mental health that can be done at the community level, which is belonging. And I'll leave it there for now for today. Alexis, I'll pass it back to you.
I love that synopsis. It is such a beautifully nuanced chapter, and we will return to that theme of belonging as well. But first, I want to get Adrian's voice into the room. Adrian is part of a feature that we added into the book that I'm really excited about. It's called The Voices from the Field. And I interviewed 5 exceptional practitioners doing very different kinds of work, some embedded in college campuses, others doing work outside of institutions, but all thinking about how do we meet our students where they are in this moment and support them. And Adrian was actually the first person I thought of for a Voices of the Field feature. And so we sat down and got to have a different kind of conversation than we normally do, where I interviewed him about thinking about his students and how you build the structures and the practical component of creating a caring campus, which is a major theme of our book. And so, Adrian, I would love for you to share a little bit about the work that you do, the students you serve, and how you think about supporting student well-being and mental health across this full spectrum that we're talking about in the book.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you for that introduction. It's interesting. So I mentioned earlier, I've been at the community college system in California for over 25 years. I've been at 3 different campuses, some smaller than the others. San Diego Miramar is part of a 40,000 student district. There's 4 colleges within our district. There's about 15,000 on our campus at Miramar. And much like my colleagues have talked about a little earlier, each of those students is unique. They have different perspectives, they have multiple layers, they have multiple identities, and how they approach our campus has always been interesting to me. We have kids as young as middle school and high school who are taking early college credit, and we have students who are in their 80s taking lifelong learning, and then everybody in between, people changing careers, people first-time freshmen, some first generation, some low income, but then also we live in a more affluent area of San Diego. So there are students who are coming from pretty privileged backgrounds. And so when you think about what they're dealing with, the first sense of like just coming to a college campus, we've had students who've talked about the intimidation factor of coming to a college campus. My parents have done this before. I'm just trying to get my degree, right? And when we were coming out of COVID, it was very unique because I think before COVID, we were very much in a mode of here's the resources we have. You're welcome to set up an appointment. We're looking forward to meeting you. After COVID, we knew that people had been isolated for over a year and they were wondering kind of what is this college thing all about? And I haven't really talked to folks outside of my immediate family for about a year. How do we handle this? So we really started to look at how do we create environments where people feel welcomed again, feel like they have resources available and faces that they know and people that they can talk with. And we were also coming into that environment where you had to keep yourself socially distant from people. You had to stay out of offices. You were wearing face masks. So we knew that we had to kind of go outside. And so I think that was the genesis of us saying, look, let's go to them and not expect them to come to us. We also started to realize that we needed to partner more effectively. Rather than have department by department do their own thing and serve their pocket of students, we started to talk about commonalities and trying to figure out how we might be able to partner more effectively for the whole body of students. For those of you who may have been working on a college campus, oftentimes when you do something just for your pocket of students, you're going to get 5, 10 students to show up. But if you're partnering with other departments, you can now collectively get 25, 50 students to show up. So what we really started to do is we created what we called a college hour. And so between the hours of roughly 11:30 to 1, we try not to schedule classes. And what we're doing instead is we're having a whole series of activities out on the quad, workshops in classrooms, opportunities for faculty to interact with students. And we're tying together a bunch of themes. So as an example, we're approaching finals. And so we had a couple of groups that were doing a study jam, essentially. But what they did is they partnered with mental health. So in addition to doing the study jam, they had tricks and tips about reducing anxiety. How do you get through the stress of finals? And so in some ways, we were embedding mental health into a lot of the things that we did without really telling students that this is about mental health. And without telling them that, hey, we're going to build your skills for resiliency, but really just saying, hey, come over, hang out with your peers, take advantage of this opportunity. Oftentimes we had food. As you know, many students love having food. And I think the journey that we've been on, and I've been with this college for about 8 years now, and it literally has been an 8 year journey. We are a lot more engaging with our students. We've created a lot more environments for many of our affinity groups. And we are talking across departments and across student services and instruction to see how we effectively collaborate with our students. So with that, I will hand it back to Alexis and try and address any questions that people might have.
Fantastic. Thank you. That idea of breaking out of our silos and to have a conversation across all of us who are working with students is so central to thinking about changing the culture in our higher education communities. And it's one of the reasons, just one of many reasons, why I wanted to focus on your work in the book. So here is what we're going to do. I have a couple of questions queued up for each of the contributors to the book, but I would love to get questions from the audience into the room as well. So you can use the Q&A feature to post those questions. They will populate on my screen and I will get to as many of those as we can. And while folks are thinking about and typing those in, I'll have one question for each of you based on your chapter and what I know of your work, things that I want to make sure that we center in what we're talking about today. So Dustin, one of the unique things about the chapter you and Joe wrote is that there are tangible exercises and activities that can be done with students or that we can do ourselves. I found them very helpful when I practiced myself. Could you tell us a little bit about those designing your life tools? In particular, maybe the Odyssey plan. I feel like that's a really good actionable one when we're thinking about supporting students.
Absolutely. Thanks for that tee up, Alexis. So much of the Designing Your Life curriculum is how we can train students to be designers, designers of their own lives. And that means navigating constraints, really empathizing with themselves, coming up with lots of different ideas before they choose. And this spirit of design thinking is really all about how we train students to diverge, come up with lots of options before they decide. And as you shared, the Odyssey plans are this beautiful exercise that really encompasses the spirit of design thinking. In the Odyssey exercises, students have a chance to draw 3 different versions of 5 year plans. The first version is the story that they tell today. The second version, something wasn't possible in that first life. And the third version is really releasing all constraints, your wild card life. What we found is that students have a set narrative around how their life will go. And by really opening the aperture, really expanding the options and allowing them to see a total of 15 years written out, they actually realize that there are bits and pieces of each life that they actually would like to explore. Rather than thinking about it as one track, having 3 parallels next to each other allow them to realize that they're actually moving between lives or would like to move between lives in order to build a meaningful life. I think so much of this exercise is about disrupting the narrative, pattern interrupting for students, and also really recognizing for students what's interesting to them. And oftentimes in that wildcard life, there is a part of that life or a feature of that life or a kernel of that life that they actually want to incorporate. So much of this work is allowing students to be creative, to ideate, to really encourage students not to just maintain the narratives that they're aware of, but really think creatively and really explore their interests to imagine what lives actually might exist, what possible selves might actually be there.
I love that. And I love that we were given permission to reproduce 3 of the tools from Designing Your Life in the book so that they are right there and at your fingertips. And what's interesting about each one of them is they're very simple graphic tools. Like here is a small table with 3 columns, and you feel like, okay, well, maybe that's not going to change my. But you sit down and you start to have that conversation, or you open the space for a student to do that and then have a conversation around it. And what you realize is how much of what we are doing every day is part of a story that we have told ourselves or other people have told us about who we are supposed to be. And opening up the space to have a genuine conversation with a caring adult and just be asked those meaningful questions about, well, how might this have changed? How are you thinking today versus 5 years ago? What does it mean when you take the guardrails off and you dream big? You might not be able to realize that thing, but how does it change what you're doing tomorrow? And I think Yeah, I'm grateful for you for including those tools because I think all of us can have those conversations. And as we think about building the kind of community on campus that we want to foster for students, it's having these meaningful conversations in all of the spaces where students are, as Adrian was mentioning, not just in the campus mental health center, because this is not a clinical conversation. This is a conversation about dreaming about the future and mentorship, which is the work of every member of the community. And so I love having it there. As we think about Adam, your chapter, I would love for you to just unpack a little bit more about what we get right and wrong about supporting student veterans and military affiliated students.
Yeah, I love that question, and it brings something to mind that's pretty pervasive across those that do this as practitioners and also those who study this. And it's another piece of the both and of the nuance, which is it is really uh, useful and works well when we create environments in which student veterans can find and interact with each other. It works really well when we find opportunities for student veterans to find faculty or staff mentors who have a military history, and that when we create opportunities for the military affiliated community even more broadly to interact. And at the same time, we don't want to inadvertently silo our student veterans, right? We want to also create opportunities and really purport that narrative that just because you chose to do this as a job for 3, 4, 5, 20, 35 years doesn't mean this is the only group of people who are going to understand you on campus, that there's so much more to your identity. And so it's that nuanced both and. Let's create the environment where individuals or student veterans get to interact with each other, be able to not just talk in military parlance, but be talk in a way where you just kind of know you're understood, right? On that kind of deeper soul level, but also really bridging that gap for those that may not on that surface level have the same experience. But when you really dig deep into it, there's so many things about the human experience that can be shared and talked about. So that's probably my quickest answer for you, Alexis, but I could talk about that all day.
I love that. Fantastic. And the question I had queued up for you, Adrian, is a connection between what we wrote about in your vignette and the chapter by the folks at Trellis Strategies. They are looking particularly at students who have basic needs insecurity and the financial stress that plays into all of this conversation around supporting students. And one of the things we talked about explicitly in your vignette is how you have created the spaces for students to have their needs met, to reduce stigma, and to create the kind of caring community that we know is so important. So I would love for you to share a little bit about that work that you've done, particularly around the basic needs pantry. I'll also just name for the folks in the audience, I'm getting some great questions and I've got those queued up to do next. But if you want to populate some additional ones there, I can pull across themes as well. So please don't hesitate to do that. And Adrian, tell me about this transformational work that you've been able to do.
So I mentioned earlier that the work we've been doing on campus has really been a journey. So 8 years ago, when I arrived on campus, our basic needs center was literally a closet that was across a parking lot near a swimming facility on our campus. And immediately in my head, I thought, wow, we're making students walk across this parking lot to come get food. How's that good? And it was interesting because they were really proud that they had a food pantry, right? So I had to gently say, hey, is there any way that we can make this on the central part of campus so that students know that it's there and anybody could kind of walk in? And we had this really interesting happenstance that occurred. We used to have a little Starbucks cafe that was literally in the student union on the second floor in a student lounge, and they moved to another location on campus. So I asked, can I take over that space? And we initially put the food pantry in there. So now it's centrally located so that students know, oh, okay, this is a place where I can come get free food if I need it. And over the last 8 years, we've essentially taken over that entire lounge. So we have a clothing closet, we have the food pantry, we have a farmer's market, we have partnerships with the county so that people can sign up for county resources. We have reps that come to campus on a regular basis, and it's right there in the center of campus. And initially, there were folks that were worried that, hey, we're going to kind of out people who need help. And in my mind, I was like, look, most of our students at some level are going to need some level of help, right? Whether it's mental health, whether it's food, whether it's access to resources. So why aren't we just saying this is a normal part of college and, take advantage of it? And I often tell students that, look, you're never going to get as much free stuff as when you are in college, right? Whether that's access to food or whether that's like books and t-shirts and whatever else. And so we really made an effort to be upfront and center with what we are doing, not only the food pantry, but mental health with the resource for our affinity groups and for students in general, is to really say, look, we're here, you're part of us, take advantage of this. And so, yeah, it's interesting when our food pantry, we have certain hours that students can come in and grab what they need. There's a line and it's right there in the middle of the building. And, and it's always interesting to me that people get there early because they're like, hey, I need to take advantage of this. And then people will ask us, hey, can you increase your hours? And, they're not shy anymore. This is part of our fabric and people know that there's a great resource in the middle of campus.
I love this idea that we had instinctively been concerned that students would feel shame and so made strategic decisions that really structurally put in place a sense of shame of walking across to the hidden closet on the other side of the parking lot. And we are seeing campuses make shifts like this in ways that are really profound because of the implicit message that is sent. So, one thing I'm seeing more and more of that is very exciting to me is the counseling center being paired with the career services office. So, those two things are happening in shared physical space to break down that barrier and to signal, these are things that we do in college. These are conversations that we have, that there is no shame in it, but also just to make it more familiar going into one space that might feel a little bit more fraught than going into the other. And so that kind of difference, I think, is incredibly impactful, and we sometimes underestimate what that does. So thank you for sharing that. I've got some great questions in the chat, and so I will ask. Some of them are specifically targeted to a couple of folks, and then some of them are broader. I'll start with one of the broader questions, which is, what should parents and students look for when they are applying to colleges and universities? What questions should they ask? And I think what's implied here is, how do we know that this campus is going to show up and have the resources that are needed for my student? And so I'll open that up to the panel. Who has an instinctive, what question should they come in with?
Oh, I'll jump on that really quickly. Um, the thing I encourage parents and students to do is to visit the campus they're thinking about if they have the opportunity. Get a feel for what the culture's like, get a feel for what the resources are like. Talk to people, talk to students that are on campus. Because ultimately, I think when you look at why students are not successful, it's oftentimes not about academics. It's about life getting in the way, right? Transportation, food, who they're hanging out with, right? And so I think what I strongly advise parents to do is to look at, the structure of the college and kind of what's available, the academics behind it, the resources that are available to the students, clubs, activities, that sort of thing. But if you get the opportunity to go onto the campus, visit the campus and get a feel for the whole thing.
Absolutely. And I'll plus one for folks who cannot come to the campus. A lot of schools are doing sort of virtual tours and things like that. But even if you can't do that, follow the school and some of its offices on Instagram, and you'll start to see what are the messages that they are sharing. And so I feel very inspired when I start to see a lot of messages about belonging, about affinity groups, about the supports that folks are having when you can't come on campus as well. Dustin, Adam, what other questions should folks have queued up? Dustin, I see you're unmuted. Help us out.
Alexis, I think a lot about how each campus may have a different culture around exploration. So I oftentimes like to ask students, how do you explore different interests? How are you exploring things that may be outside of your degree program? So that feels like one that feels quite relevant. The second is that whenever I visit campuses, I always like to ask students, tell me about a professor that cares about you as a person, or tell me about a professor that gets you excited about learning. I think research has told us time and time again that faculty connection is an incredible correlation with a really positive college experience and life preparedness as well. Having those mentors and having those adults on campus that can really be sounding boards, I think, is an incredibly to have. And I think different campuses have different advising cultures or mentorship cultures as well.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that, ask first year students that question, not just seniors, because in those first year classes, those can be larger, it can be harder to find mentoring relationships. It's really important to know that in that first year, which we know is more emotionally fraught for a lot of students in that moment of transition, that they feel seen and heard and valued by faculty members as well. So I love that series of questions. Adam, you are on the campus at UNC Chapel Hill. You've been with us here at Harvard. What questions should folks be thinking about?
Yeah, and I think I go back to this idea of like knowing the student who's applying and figuring out where they are at in their journey. And I think about the idea that development and growth comes from a right ratio, but I'll call it a mix because I think it can be fluid of challenge and support. And so I think one of the things that can feel a little bit comfortable in the moment of is walking onto a campus if you have the opportunity to tour, right? Or going through the website and going, oh, you know what? I'm completely comfortable. I can absolutely see myself here and I can be a rock star here. And that feels good. It feels so good to walk into a room and go, oh my gosh, I've arrived and I don't feel any fear and anxiety. And also, I think about that idea of growth and development of saying, okay, I walked onto this campus and maybe I don't feel super comfortable now, but maybe I'm curious enough that I could be. Or maybe I'm not comfortable, but I'm aspirationally comfortable. Maybe I'm not seeing myself, but I'm seeing who I think I might want to be in 2 or 3 years. And so I think going in with that mindset of like intentional, not reckless courage could be one of the things. I know it's more of an ethereal answer than a tangible one, but
I mean, ethereal and tangible. That is indeed the mission of the book, is blending those two things. The last thing I'll say, because my first career was actually as a college counselor, and so I can't not say this in response to this question, which is as students are embarking on this process of looking for college, and this also draws in some of the work from the National Association of College Admission Counseling that's in the book. We need to refrain from the language of the dream school versus the safety school. There is nothing more problematic to me in the way that we talk to students about college than allowing one single school to suddenly become the dream. Knowing how hard it is to get into so many colleges and universities, if that dream school is one of those schools with a 7%, 10% admissions rate, you are setting up a student to feel a sense of failure when there are the vast majority of colleges and universities that they can apply that have a high admissions rate where they are going to thrive and they are going to find supports. The same end or the other end of the spectrum is calling a school a safety school, because what you're doing in saying that is signaling to the student that, well, this one will take you, but it's not quite aspirational. And you are labeling an exceptional institution where they can thrive with this moniker that is going to become part of their experience of that institution. And so getting out of that idea that there is any one school that can or should be a dream, that any school is safe, and having a broader conversation about these are thriving campuses. These are places where I can see myself growing. This is a growing campus. That immediately changes the tenor when decisions come in. And it's really important to make that kind of shift. We have a couple of specific questions. And Adam, this one is for you, and I'm going to read it exactly so I get it right. It says, question for Adam. From my understanding, having a history of mental health issues can prevent you from eligibility in medical clearance slash OCS in certain military branches. As a student veteran, do you feel like the stigma surrounding mental health was pervasive at all? And what is important for incoming student affairs professionals to know about working with student veterans?
yeah, thank you for this really fantastic question. And just to, the military has, just a little bit more acronyms than higher ed, but two very idiosyncratic professions. OCS is Officer Candidate School, and actually even more than that, any diagnosis, whether it's physical health or mental health or the combination of the two, can limit not only your ability to join the service, but also your ability to stay in the service. And not only your ability to stay in the service, but your ability to go to certain trainings or certain deployments. And healthcare in general has an impact on this, not just mental health. And this question is something I think about a lot, certainly experientially, but also the literature shows that student veterans do have higher stigma towards mental health than their non-military affiliated peers. The stigma across those in the military and veterans is decreasing, but the stigma for student veterans is still a little bit higher. Could this be one of the main things that contributes to it? I believe yes. Have I seen the definitive study that says this is causation? No. Will there be one? Probably not. But I believe yes. Because here's my thought, right? When I was a therapist in the military, I'd be very open with my client to say, because we're in the military, you do have confidentiality with me as a healthcare provider. But whether I'm a mental health therapist or I'm an orthopedic surgeon or no matter what, at a certain point, there are things that I have to tell your leadership about just with diagnosis, because it can actually not just negatively impact your safety, but also the safety of the unit around you, right? So I think about, what if there is a pilot who has some kind of a disorder where they just go to sleep randomly, right? I'm avoiding diagnostic terms here. It's actually my responsibility to ensure that those that are putting people in the air know that this is happening medically, right? So if that's occurring in the military and I'm a patient and I'm going in and I know that there's certain things that my therapist may or may not tell my leadership, what's happening when I enter a clinic outside? Is there a certain point where I go, okay, well, at what point do you tell? I get it's confidential, but at what point do you tell the dean, right? I get it's confidential, but how much do you tell my professors? So I think that it does factor in. And what does that mean? It just means that as we support student veterans, especially if we're recruiting student veterans to our school, we want to make sure that our clinic is equipped to have those conversations to talk about what are the limits of confidentiality that are occurring here, and what is behavioral health on a college campus. Can I add one more detail, Alexis, or am I okay? It's great.
Absolutely.
I'll add one more here, which is very often college mental health centers do a great job of saying, here's the treatment we can give and we can't give. And very often they say, what we are here for is short-term counseling or solution-focused counseling. And if there's long-term work, we're actually going to refer you out to the network or to the city, right? When student veterans come in and we know the stigma is a little bit higher, and they're entering our clinic, I believe it is a mistake to meet them at the door with saying, you know what? We actually only do short-term work. So this complex PSD or PTSD or this combat trauma, please use your VA benefits or your vet center. Because I think what we're telling the veteran in that moment is actually not just we as a clinic, but we as a campus cannot handle this thing that you're bringing in, right? There's two nuances to that. One is you can have a supportive conversation with somebody and not engage in long-term therapy. So you can nail that first meeting to say, we accept you, you're a part of our community, let's have this intentionally healing interaction, and also I'm going to connect you with resources. But also, not all veterans come with combat experience, and not all veterans come with PTSD. And I think I see a little bit too often that as soon as we see that military experience, our campus clinics go, might not be a good fit for us. So I'll leave it there for now.
Wonderful. I will add on one piece that just goes beyond the military affiliation, which is just around how we meet and welcome students into clinical care when they are on our college campuses. And it really centers exactly what Adam just said, which is being very clear about issues of confidentiality. One of the things that I've seen a lot of clinical counseling centers do is they will have a sort of screening form or a screening phone call that you have to do before you can actually see a person to have a conversation. And it's really important, if you need to do that as part of your practice of onboarding somebody, that it is very clear at the top of that form or at the beginning of that phone call who is getting that information, because it is incredibly vulnerable to enter information or be on a phone call with a person who you don't see, and you don't know how the things you're revealing that might feel very raw or very hard to share with somebody else, and you don't know how that is going to be in conversation. We have one of our other vignettes about practice is Dr. Julie Lee, who runs the mental health SIG group for our Alumni Association at Harvard. She works with a lot of international students and was at Wellesley for many years. And one of the things she said that was really profound and important for this moment was that international students were particularly concerned in conversations with each other. They were saying, if anybody thinks you have a diagnosis, that might impact your ability to stay in this country. And while that wasn't true, because those were confidential conversations, that's what they were telling each other. And it was keeping folks who needed support at a moment where they needed profound support out of getting that help. And so we need to do the work of being very, very transparent on the front end. We are getting close to time. And so there's another question for the entire group here, which is that I had mentioned bringing in practitioners from very different silos, including the three of you and the ways that we work with students. The question is, were there any particularly surprising commonalities between the different fields when it came to supporting student mental health? So what are the points of connection we are seeing in our conversations with each other, in the book itself, or as we think about the work that we do? And Adrian, if I could start with you, because you have a nice sort of top-down view of student affairs practitioners and faculty. What is a point of connection, things that we do have in common when we're having this conversation?
It's interesting. I mean, I love being in the webinar only to learn from you all, my colleagues, because as I hear you talking, I think about the practical nature of what happens on our campus and how we align with that, right? And I think the thing that stood out to me the most as we've had this conversation, as I read the book, um, is that sense of community, quite honestly. That idea that helping students to understand that they are not alone,
Yeah.
that oftentimes the student next to him is thinking the same thing. Um, and when we think about our own experiences, those of us who've gone to college and maybe went to a big university or even to a small community college, that intimidation factor of, am I really belonging here? Do I really get the resources I need? Can I be successful here? And being able to really guide students that through that thought process, because quite honestly, they do belong here, and they will be successful. They just have to really engage. And I think you see that throughout the book, this idea of, being part of community, being kind of engaging, and really respecting the fact that our students are very unique individuals. There's not one common student anywhere. They're very unique.
I will quote Dr. Adam Pierson Milano, who always tells us, if you know one veteran, you know one veteran. And I think we can extrapolate from that. If you know one student, you know one student. But what
Mhm.
we do know about students in general is that belonging is the most important lever that we can pull. If a student has a sense of belonging, they are more likely to graduate, they are more likely to do well, they are more likely, to report feeling happy and connected, but they are also more likely to get help when they need it because there is a person who sees them struggling, because there is a person who says, oh, hey, I had trouble in that class too. Have you tried the writing center? Or because there is a person who says, oh, yeah, the counseling center, absolutely. They totally understood this thing that was going on. Have you tried? And breaks down that barrier and normalizes the challenges. Dustin, Adam, what other ways do we see points of connection across all of these siloed ways that we work with students across higher education? And Adam, I see you're unmuted. Help us out.
Yeah, I think it is. I'll speak quickly to just say I think it really does reiterate that point. And I know when you get the offer to write a chapter, you think, oh my gosh, I wonder how this is going to feed in or support or disagree with these other things. And I felt like I admit I felt like I was taking this really big swing by spending half the chapter on saying actually belonging and loneliness are key. And then I'm going to use the second half to talk clinical, only to find as we engage with the different authors and had the opportunity to read the book, that is central. And I reiterate that on purpose, not to be redundant, but just to say, when we talk about mental health, I think it puts it in this category for us that we go like, oof, I need someone who's licensed, I need a clinic. But in reality, mental health is certainly complicated, but at times as easy as saying, who can I invest a little bit more time into today? How could I develop my syllabus in a way where no one's reading it and then self-selecting out of belonging in my classroom? And if we go in with all these intentions of these small moments to increase belonging, I think we're going to see mental health, both the positive and the negative, change.
Absolutely. And I will connect that to the other chapter that is paired with yours, which is by Dr. Amanda Latz at Ball State University, who's an expert in college student mental health, faculty members, and community colleges, bringing all three of those things together in our chapter. And she does this wonderful thing of naming cold policies versus warm policies and what we signal by having here is the letter of the law of what you need to do and how you need to get an extension versus language of real life happens, reach out to me, making sure that the standards are high, that we're still educating students, that we're not, exempting them unnecessarily because of a rough Tuesday, but where we recognize that there are moments of profound struggle and we can be responsive to students in those moments. Dustin, I'll round out our answer to that with you. What point of connection do you see across all of these silos that we exist in?
It's hard not to just plus one what Adrian and Adam have shared. Belonging is a felt sensation. I've been really thinking about how in all of these chapters, these practitioners are talking about how they support students in feeling like they matter. And I think beyond feeling a sense of community, making sure that students feel significant and that they have something to offer and share just feels like a common thread that we're all hoping to create and all hoping to foster in the students that we serve.
I love that. And what I will add on to it is that we all, as practitioners working in whatever way we do with students, as parents, as student affairs practitioners, as faculty members, that we matter in these conversations more than we sometimes realize. For those of you who know me and you know the work that I do with Nancy Hill, I use a lot of archival materials that go back all the way to the 1940s and then a robust body of materials from the 1970s. And so we've been able to follow cohorts of college students across 50 years after they graduate. And what we have seen in that work is that the moments of micro mentoring, the 10 minutes where you sat with somebody and heard them and validated them and offered a suggestion, those things actually matter throughout the course of somebody's life. I mean, it was amazing to sit down with 70-year-olds reflecting back on what it was like to be a college student in the 1970s and to have them talk about the pivot points having been a 10-minute conversation, not with a person who even knew them all that well, but a person who cared enough in that moment. And I think that as we, over the past month, it's been a month and a day now since the book was launched, as we have entered into these conversations, that I think is one of the most important things we can take away from each of our chapter authors and from the book as a whole, is that every single caring adult who is working with a student in any capacity has the ability to make them feel safe and seen. And if they need additional help, to point them to the resources where they can get the help that they need. So thank you to all three of you for being in conversation. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, including I see in the attendance list, Kit Van Camp, who is my faculty assistant, who read every single word and placed every single period and comma in this entire manuscript. They are a rock star, and I am totally indebted to them for their help as well. Thank you to Molly for the lovely introduction and for shepherding this book over the past 2.5 years, and to all of you for being part of this conversation and spreading this message forward, supporting all of our students so that they can thrive. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.